Welcome back to Attic Lore. Tonight we leave behind the lost tapes and ancient crimes and dive into a story born from the sudden dread of a late-night encounter in an American city. It is the narrative of a simple everyday event, a late-night walk, that escalates into a gut-wrenching psychological chase by a man who is something far beyond strange. This is the Smiling Man. This is the history of the terror of the Smiling Man, a creepypasta that taps into the most primal fear. What happens when human behavior breaks all rules and becomes something entirely, terrifyingly other? Chapter 1. The Solitude of the Urban Night. Our story begins in the late 2000s, in a large, unnamed American city. The narrator, a college student, describes his routine, going for a walk late at night, often after midnight, to decompress. These hours are dead. The streets are empty, the sounds of traffic have subsided, and the city belongs exclusively to the night walkers. The safety of this routine relies on an unspoken agreement. The people you meet late at night are predictable. They are either drunk, working, or both. They are fundamentally human. On this particular night, however, that routine was interrupted. The narrator was walking down an empty, well-lit street, absorbed in his thoughts, when he noticed a figure out of the corner of his eye. Someone was approaching him. It was a man, tall, thin, dressed in what looked like old-fashioned, messy clothes. The time was close to 1 a.m. This alone was not unusual. What immediately caught the narrator's attention, however, was the man's posture and movement. He was standing on the corner facing away from the narrator, but when he began to move, he did so in a deeply strange manner. He didn't walk. He staggered. His gait was unsettling. His legs seemed to swing out further than normal, his knees were constantly bent, and his head was cocked at an unnatural angle. It was like watching a marionette whose strings were being pulled erratically by a child. Chapter 2. The Unnatural Smile. The narrator tried to dismiss the man as simply being drunk or perhaps high. He decided to cross the street, giving the figure a wide berth, a standard precaution in the quiet of the night. But as the narrator crossed, the man's movement changed. He suddenly pivoted his entire body, not just his head but his whole torso, to face the narrator. And then the narrator saw the face. The man was looking directly at him, and his face was dominated by a smile. But this was not a warm, friendly, or even maniacal smile. It was something physically impossible. The narrator describes it as a cartoonishly wide grin, stretching from ear to ear, pulling his lips taut and exposing his teeth. It looked less like an expression of joy and more like a mask crafted from stretched human skin. It was fixed, unnatural, and profoundly disturbing. At this point, the man stopped staggering and began moving with purpose. He started what the narrator describes as a skipping, slow-motion dance. He was dancing toward the narrator. The movement was horrific. It was jerky, silent, and entirely inappropriate for the street. He would take huge, elaborate steps, his face still locked in that impossibly wide, silent grin. The scene was utterly surreal. A man, alone on a dark street, performing a slow, bizarre dance straight out of a nightmare, his face permanently frozen in that terrifying expression. Chapter 3. The Slow, Silent Pursuit. The narrator's first instinct was pure, freezing fear. This man was not drunk, he was wrong. Every single aspect of his movement defied normal human behavior and screamed danger. The man continued his slow, theatrical dance, keeping a strange, consistent distance from the narrator, about 50 feet. The narrator tried to ignore him, increasing his pace, desperate to reach a corner or a cluster of buildings where he could take refuge. But when the narrator sped up, the Smiling Man also sped up, maintaining that unsettling 50-foot gap. His dance became a fast, frantic skip, a bizarre blend of ballet and a hurried child's jump rope game. Yet his movements remained unnervingly silent. There was no footfall, no breathing, only the silence of the night broken by the narrator's own ragged breathing. This silent pursuit is the core of the psychological terror. It suggests that the Smiling Man is not constrained by human limitations. He is an anomaly, a creature defined by his terrifying, unblinking smile and his unnatural gait. He was putting on a performance for an audience of one. The narrator turned down a side street, hoping to lose him. He glanced back, and the smiling man was there, still 50 feet away, still skipping, and still wearing that frozen, stretched grin. It was a moment of true despair. He realized he could not simply outrun or hide from this entity. Chapter 4. The change in mood and the shift to aggression. After several blocks of this terrifying silent chase, the smiling man's behavior changed drastically. He abruptly stopped dancing. He ceased his bizarre skipping motion and stood completely still in the middle of the street. His face, however, remained fixed in that wide, painful grin. The narrator, seeing the opportunity, sprinted away, putting 2 blocks between himself and the man. He felt a moment of relief, thinking the terrifying performance was over. But then he looked back. The smiling man was no longer dancing. He was now running. The narrator describes this run as the most terrifying part of the entire encounter. It was not a natural run. It was a furious, fast, almost superhuman sprint. The man covered the distance of 2 blocks in mere seconds. The narrator describes the terrifying shift in the atmosphere. The playfulness was gone, replaced by pure predatory aggression. Crucially, the man's physical form seemed to distort as he ran. His arms flailed wildly, his torso leaned impossibly far forward, and his legs pumped with a non-human intensity. The smile, however, remained exactly the same, a mask of fixed, joyful malice plastered onto a body moving with lethal speed. Chapter 5. The Break for Safety. The narrator realized he was no longer watching a performance. He was the prey. He ran for his life, propelled by adrenaline and the sheer terror of that silent, rapidly approaching grin. His immediate goal was his apartment building, which was less than a block away. He ran towards the brightly lit entrance, knowing it was his only chance. As he reached the entrance and fumbled with his keys, he glanced one last time over his shoulder. The smiling man was now less than 10 feet behind him. The narrator could hear the man's heavy, ragged breathing for the first time, a disgusting, wet sound that broke the terrifying silence of the pursuit. The narrator describes the final horrifying detail. The man was leaning impossibly close, his eyes wide and vacant, staring directly into the narrator's soul. That grotesque smile was the last thing the narrator saw before he frantically shoved his key into the lock. He burst into the safety of the apartment building lobby, slamming and locking the heavy glass door behind him. Chapter 6. The Aftermath and the Unseen Presence. Safe inside the lobby, the narrator stumbled, catching his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked out the glass door, expecting to see the smiling man banging frantically to get in. But there was no one there. The street was empty. The man had vanished as quickly and silently as he had appeared. The only evidence of the terrifying event was the narrator's own panic and the fact that he was drenched in sweat and shaking uncontrollably. The experience had a lasting, profound psychological impact. The narrator recounts spending the next several weeks paralyzed by fear, unable to leave his apartment late at night. Every shadow, every muffled sound from the street became a source of acute anxiety. The fear was not just that he was almost attacked. The fear was rooted in the unnaturalness of the encounter. The smiling man was not a mugger, a homeless person, or a typical assailant. His behavior, the bizarre dance, the non-human sprint, the frozen, unchanging smile, suggested something paraphysical or demonic. He was not motivated by theft or typical violence, but by the sheer desire to induce terror and despair. The encounter was a glimpse into a terrifying break in the reality of the urban landscape. Chapter 7. The Enduring Myth of Unnatural Joy. The story of the smiling man quickly gained traction in the creepypasta community because it perfectly captured the contemporary fear of the breakdown of social norms. In a crowded world, we rely on predictable behavior to feel safe. When someone's behavior, especially their facial expression and gait, becomes mathematically wrong, it suggests a deeper, fundamental terror. The smiling man is the physical manifestation of joyful malice. He represents a predator who finds pleasure not in the act of violence itself, but in the terror of the chase, the fear in the eyes of his prey, and the psychological torment of his grotesque performance. The legend serves as a powerful cautionary tale for the modern pedestrian. The city is not as safe as you think, and the stranger you see walking down a dark street might be hiding a terrifying non-human secret beneath a stretched, silent grin. To this day, the question remains, what was the smiling man? Was he an escaped mental patient, suffering from a rare psychological condition? Was he a dark cryptid, an urban entity preying on the lonely and the vulnerable? Or was he something worse, a demon who found amusement in the pure psychological torture of a simple, late-night walk? The experience left the narrator with a terrifying realization that he had stumbled upon a secret that exists in the shadows of every city, a place where the rules of humanity are suspended, and the only response to seeing the dark truth is to run. And if you ever find yourself walking late at night, alone on a dark street, and you see a figure approaching with an impossibly wide grin, do not stop to investigate. Do not scream. Just run. Because the terror of the smiling man is that his performance will only end when he is finished with his prey. Now we want to hear from you. Which element of the smiling man is more frightening? His silent, theatrical dance or his incredibly fast, predatory sprint? Let us know your theories in the comments below. If you enjoy diving into the shadows of the unexplained, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join us next time on Attic Lore.